A mostly true story about 5 grown men who really should have known better. 5 men, 1 aeroplane, and 2 missing passports. Many years ago, when mobile phones were mostly used for making phone calls, maps were made of paper, and grown men were apparently allowed to make very questionable decisions without the internet warning them first. There were 5 friends. Their names were Percy, Bondi, AJ, Andy, and Chris. They were all around 40 years old. This is important because everything you are about to read was done by fully grown men. Not children, not teenagers, grown men. One cold winter morning, the 5 friends had arranged to meet at a tiny grass airfield somewhere in the English countryside. It wasn't exactly Heathrow Airport. There were no enormous terminals, no moving walkways, no shops selling sandwiches for 14 pounds. There was a little hangar, a windsock, a strip of grass, and sitting proudly beside the hangar, a small 6-seater aeroplane, and standing beside it was Percy. Percy was their pilot. At least that was the general idea. Percy, AJ, Andy, and Chris arrived carrying bags, coats, and enough skiing equipment to make it look as though they were planning to invade Switzerland. "Morning," shouted Percy. "Morning," they shouted back. Everyone was very excited. They were going on an adventure. They were going to fly all the way from England to the mountains near Andorra, where they planned to ski, snowboard, eat enormous meals, and generally behave like men half their age. Right, everyone got their passports? There was a silence.
Damn, forgot mine.
Damn, mine too, damn. This was a special sort of silence. The sort of silence that happens when somebody has just asked a very simple question and 2 people suddenly realize they've done something incredibly stupid. Percy patted his pockets. Pat, pat, pat. Nothing. Chris searched his bag. Zip. Pocket. Another pocket. Inside pocket. Trouser pocket. Nothing. Percy looked at Chris. Chris looked at Percy. AJ stared at them. Andy stared at them. Bondi stared at them. A sensible group of 40-year-old men would probably have stopped at this point. They would have driven home, collected the passports, checked their paperwork, perhaps made a nice cup of tea. This was not a sensible group of 40-year-old men. Bondi shrugged. "Never mind," he said. "We're off." And that was that. 5 men climbed into a little aeroplane. 3 had passports, 2 didn't, and absolutely nobody seemed particularly worried about it. The little aeroplane bumped along the grass runway. Faster, faster. Then suddenly the wheels left the ground. They were flying. England became smaller beneath them. Fields turned into green and brown squares. Roads became thin gray lines. Houses became tiny dots. Percy looked out of the window. "Here you go, Bondi, you fly it." "Now your turn, AJ." "Back to you, Bondi." Bondi was concentrating on flying the aeroplane, which everyone agreed was probably a good idea. For a while, everything was peaceful. Then, far ahead, something appeared on the horizon. Something enormous, something white, something that seemed to stretch from one side of the world to the other. The Pyrenees. As the aeroplane flew closer, the mountains grew, and grew, and grew. The Pyrenees were gigantic. Snow-covered peaks towered into the sky. Deep valleys twisted between them. Percy pressed his face towards the window. "Crumbs," he said. "Are we actually going to get over these?" The little aeroplane continued climbing. Eventually, something wonderful happened. They were above them. Below the aircraft stretched one of the most spectacular sights any of them had ever seen. Mountains, snow, valleys, clouds curling around enormous rocky peaks. For once, nobody said anything. Then Percy ruined the silence. "I've got an idea." 4 heads turned towards him. These were words that would cause problems many times over the years. Percy pointed down. "Instead of flying over the mountains?" "Yes," said Bondi cautiously. "Why don't we fly through the valleys?" Andy frowned. "You mean the valleys with the enormous mountains on both sides?" "Exactly." There was another silence. Percy smiled. "It'll be brilliant." Bondi allowed Percy to take the controls for a while. "Nice and gentle," Bondi told him. "Of course," said Percy. The aircraft immediately banked. AJ grabbed his seat. "I think Bondi said gentle," Percy laughed. Soon, they were flying along a huge mountain valley. On their left was a mountain. On their right was another mountain. Ahead were even more mountains. For 5 men from the relatively flat countryside of England, this was magnificent. Look at that! Look over there! Wow! Blimey! Are we supposed to be this close to that? That last comment was ignored. They were looking for an old grass airstrip somewhere down in the valley. The only problem was that finding a grass airstrip from the air is rather like trying to find a particular blade of grass in a field full of grass. "Can anyone see it?" asked Percy. No. "What's it supposed to look like?" asked AJ. "Grass," replied Bondi. AJ looked down at several million acres of grass. Excellent. They flew further along the valley. Then Chris pointed. "There!" Everyone looked. There, squeezed into the valley below them, was a strip of grass that looked suspiciously short. "That's an airfield?" asked Andy. "Apparently. It looks like someone's back garden." They circled. Then they came into land. Down, 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 bump! The wheels touched the grass. Bump, bump. Everyone bounced. "Lovely landing," said Percy. "We haven't stopped yet," replied Chris. Eventually they did. 5 doors might have opened at once if the airplane had actually had 5 doors. Instead, everyone climbed out and stood looking at the mountains surrounding them. They had made it. Well, almost. There was still the small matter of getting into Andorra, and the even smaller matter of the 2 missing passports. The 5 friends loaded their luggage and ski equipment into a car and set off towards the border. Everyone was cheerful. Everyone was laughing. Then they saw it. Border control. Percy stopped laughing. Chris stopped laughing. Percy slowly turned towards Chris. "Passport." Chris slowly turned towards Percy. "Don't say that word." "Oh dear." "What?" "I'd forgotten we'd forgotten them." "Well, I've just remembered." They approached the checkpoint. Percy tried to look normal. Unfortunately, the harder you try to look normal, the less normal you look. "Stop staring straight ahead," whispered Chris. "I'm trying to look innocent." "You look terrified." "So do you." "I am terrified." The car stopped. A border officer approached. Percy's heart went thump, 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 thump. Chris suddenly found the dashboard extremely interesting. The officer looked into the car. 5 men smiled back at him. Possibly the least convincing collection of smiles ever assembled in one vehicle. The officer asked a question. "Where are you going?" 5 voices answered. "Skiing." The officer looked at them. Percy waited for the next question. "Passports, please." Surely it was coming. The officer looked at their ski equipment. Then he waved his hand. "Go ahead." Nobody moved. Bondi blinked. The officer waved again. "Go." Percy drove. Slowly at first, then slightly faster. They went around a corner. The checkpoint disappeared behind them. There was silence. Then the car erupted. "We're in!" "I don't believe it." "He didn't even ask." Percy slapped Chris on the shoulder. "See? Nothing to worry about." Chris stared at him. "You were nearly hiding under the seat." Their first day in the mountains was wonderful. They skied. They laughed.
Ready to ski, everyone?
They fell over occasionally. AJ fell over more than occasionally. At one point, AJ disappeared into a cloud of snow and emerged looking like an iced bun. That evening, the 5 friends found somewhere warm to eat. They talked about the flight. They talked about the mountains. They talked about the border. And, as happens when 5 old friends get together, every story became slightly more dramatic each time it was told. Outside, however, the snow was falling, and falling, and falling. The next morning, Percy opened the curtains. Blimey! Everyone came running. During the night, nearly a foot of fresh snow had fallen. Everything was white. Roofs were white. Cars were white. Roads were white. Trees were white. And Percy had another idea. "Let's go snowboarding." Andy looked at him. "Do we know how?" Percy thought about this. "No." "Excellent," said Andy. And off they went. Before attempting an actual mountain, the 5 friends decided to practice. This was surprisingly sensible. They found a high snowy bank near a ski lift. Below them, dozens of people were waiting patiently in a queue. which meant they had an audience. Percy looked down the bank. Right. Who's first? One brave volunteer shuffled forward. His snowboard was strapped firmly to his boots. Fresh powder stretched invitingly below. Off you go, he pushed forward. For approximately one glorious second, he was a snowboarder. Then the front of his board went straight under the soft powder. Instead of gliding across the surface, the board buried itself. The rider stopped. He sank into the snow up to his waist. The other four burst out laughing. Unfortunately, so did half the people waiting for the ski lift. "That's not how you do it," shouted the second man. He pushed off. Boom! Now there were two 40-year-old men buried up to their waists. The third man was laughing so much he could barely stand. "Move aside, professionals." Off he went. He traveled perhaps 2 meters further. Everyone watching thought he might actually make it. Then, boom, 3 men. 3 snowboards, 3 heads sticking out of the snow. The cue for the ski lift was now providing helpful applause. By the time all 5 had attempted it, the bank looked as though somebody had planted a crop of middle-aged men. Percy tried pulling one leg free. His other leg sank deeper. "This isn't going quite as planned." "You had a plan?" asked Andy. Eventually, they escaped from the snow. Next came the chair lift. It was a small, old-fashioned single-seat lift. 1 chair, 1 person. Simple. Or so it appeared. The first man positioned himself carefully. The chair arrived. He grabbed it. For 3 seconds, everything looked perfect. Then his snowboard caught. He traveled a few feet. Plop! Down he went. The chair continued up the mountain without him. Next, the second man tried. He managed slightly further. Plop! "That's the record," shouted Percy. The third tried. He went further still. "Go on, 5 feet. 10 feet." Everyone cheered. Then, it became a competition. Not to reach the top, just to fall over slightly further away than the previous person. Eventually, after enough attempts to entertain everyone in the lift queue, they began getting the hang of it. One by one, they were carried up the mountain. At the top, the 5 friends reunited. Percy looked down the slope. Right then, nobody moved. "What's wrong?" AJ pointed downhill. "We've spent so long learning how to get up here, nobody's thought about getting down. There was only one way." They pushed off. And somehow, they snowboarded. Not beautifully, not gracefully, and certainly not in a way that would trouble the Olympic selection committee. But they did it. They zigzagged. They wobbled. They fell. They got up. They crashed into piles of powder. They laughed until their sides hurt, and by the bottom, they all agreed on one thing. It had been absolutely brilliant. All holidays eventually come to an end. Soon, it was time to fly home. They drove back through the valley towards the little grass airfield. "There she is," said Bondi. Then everyone went quiet. The aeroplane had disappeared. Well, almost. There was an aeroplane-shaped mound of snow where they had left it. 4 inches of snow covered the wings and fuselage. "Oh," said Chris. "Oh dear," said Andy. "We'll get some scrapers," said Percy. They went off to find tools. By the time they returned, things had somehow become worse. Much worse. The snow had partially melted and frozen. The aircraft was now covered with around 2 inches of solid ice. Bondi tapped it. "Talk, talk." Oh. Percy produced a plastic scraper. Chris found something similar. Andy had a credit card. Soon 5 grown men were attacking an aeroplane with an assortment of scrapers and bank cards. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Chris's card slipped from his hand. AJ managed to send a chunk of ice straight down the back of his coat. "Ah!" Everyone laughed. AJ danced around. "It's down my trousers." This did not make anyone laugh less. Slowly, painfully, the ice came away. Eventually, the aircraft emerged. They stood back proudly. Bondi inspected it carefully. At last, they were ready. The 5 friends climbed aboard. The propeller spun. They taxied towards the runway. "Home," said AJ. "Home," agreed Percy. The aircraft turned. Percy applied power. They accelerated. 20 miles an hour. 30. 40. Faster. The little aeroplane raced along the runway. And then, deer. A deer ran right in front of them. 5 pairs of eyes became enormous. The deer ran. The aircraft accelerated. Go on! For one alarming moment, airplane and deer seemed determined to occupy exactly the same piece of airfield. They were airborne. Nobody spoke. The deer disappeared beneath them. Finally, Percy broke the silence. Well, everyone looked at him. That woke me up. The mountains slowly disappeared behind them. Everyone relaxed. Then Bondi checked the fuel. Percy heard the Nobody likes hearing a pilot say, What does mean? We'll need some fuel. Where? France. Percy looked at Chris. Chris looked at Percy. No, said Chris. Yep. The passports? The passports. They had somehow managed to forget about them again. They landed at a small French airfield. The aircraft taxied to the fuel area. Percy climbed out trying to appear as though he was a respectable international traveler who definitely had all the correct documentation. Chris did the same. An official appeared. Percy smiled. The official spoke to Bondi. Percy waited. Chris waited. Surely this time someone would ask. Surely their luck had run out. The aircraft was refueled. The official finished speaking. Nobody asked Percy anything. Nobody asked Chris anything. They climbed back aboard. Percy started the engine. As soon as the doors were shut, Percy grinned. Lucky again, Chris shook his head. I am never traveling with you again. He did, of course. Many times. Eventually, the familiar green countryside of England appeared ahead. Everyone became quieter. Adventures are strange things. At the beginning, you can't wait to leave. At the end, you're pleased to see home. Then Bondi pointed ahead. There it is, their little grass airfield. The same grass. The same hangar. The same windsock. Percy brought the aircraft down. Down they came. Lower, lower, bump. The wheels touched the grass. They were home. The aircraft rolled to a stop. The engine fell silent. For a moment, the 5 friends simply sat there. Then Percy started laughing. Soon, everyone was laughing. They climbed out and unloaded their bags. 5 friends had left that airfield expecting a skiing holiday. Instead, they'd flown across Europe, crossed the Pyrenees, flown through mountain valleys, entered Andorra with 2 missing passports, discovered they were terrible snowboarders, entertained an entire ski lift queue, dug themselves repeatedly out of deep snow, found their aircraft frozen solid, scraped it clean with credit cards, nearly met a deer during takeoff, landed in France for fuel, and somehow got all the way home again, and they had loved every minute of it.